Hey everyone, welcome to 21st Century Saints. We've missed you. We've been kind of busy, and we are not going to take a huge amount of time to say our hellos. We have Ruth, we have Sarah, we have Nemo the Mormon, we have Peter Blakely. You know them all by this point. Any announcements before we start? We're just getting straight into business. Are there any karaoke nights coming up?
Oh, yeah. On the 29th of this month, there is a karaoke night in Leamington. Karanuku.
We're canoeing.
Yes, karaoke night in Leamington Spa. There are some extra tickets that have been made available, so feel free to come along and join in with that. Yeah, should be pretty good.
Awesome. And it's the first opportunity for people to really get together to celebrate your excommunication, commiserate your excommunication,
celebrate. Celebrate's a strong word, but it's my official welcome into the ex-Mormon community, I think, is how we're branding it. So
it's your rite of passage, and yeah, so everyone is welcome. There are tickets that have been made available just recently. It's looking very popular, and you guys are going to have a ball. Thrive karaoke nights are awesome, and this is nice and close to Christmas, so come and have fun. We are going to jump right into tonight's episode. I am going to unfortunately have glasses on and off the whole night, so I apologize for screen glare in advance, but I'm at that age. We want to talk about Heaven's Helpline, and my hope is that from this, everyone's going to be listening. Everyone's going to be watching. I'm hoping that more podcasters are going to be talking about it, because this, my friends, is so worth it. The explanation of what Heaven's Helpline is that the blurb underneath these podcast notes is that it's a podcast from the New Zealand Herald. It says, how far has the Mormon Church gone to cover up abuse? When journalist Murray Jones started looking into the church's finances in New Zealand, an intriguing Facebook post alerted him to a much bigger and much darker scandal. From the New Zealand Herald, Heaven's Helpline is a 6-part investigation into how the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints built a system that protects its wealth and reputation and shields sexual predators from the law. And it is that good. It is genuinely that good. This is possibly the best piece of investigative journalism that I have ever seen. It is right up there with the story of, that we see in Mike Resende's work.
Spotlight.
Spotlight, the Spotlight movie where it was highlighted there. So Murray Jones has a pretty impressive CV. He is a really reputable journalist. In the UK, I think he's pretty relevant. He's done work for BBC's Panorama before. He still works with the BBC, and he's currently living in New Zealand and has come across this story. Sarah, a lot of this conversation is going to focus on you and your experiences. Do you want to talk a bit about how Murray got in touch with us? Because he reached out first, right?
Murray reached out some weeks ago while still investigating the story and while putting together the podcast, which is number 1, by the way, in the New Zealand podcast list at the moment. So really gaining in popularity, which is great for throwing a spotlight on the problems that need resolving. He contacted me because of the work he was aware we had done with 21st Century Saints and with the rest of the Britvengers crew around looking around abuse, safeguarding, problems within the church, and the campaign and advocacy that we had gone through with the church to try and make sure things were put in place to safeguard, to protect, to implement just very basic safeguarding procedures. And Murray was familiar with our podcasting, familiar with the work we've done. So we reached out to have a discussion about what have been your concerns? What have you done? Why did you do this? What's been your experience? So we had a very long discussion around all of that, which will come out a bit tonight and a bit tomorrow night in the final episode of
Yeah,
Heaven's
so the first
Helpline.
5 episodes are currently out and you're able to listen. I will forgive you if you want to leave this episode and go start listening right now, because let me tell you, it's worth it. But if you want to know a little bit more, I think we can give you some pretty helpful context and have a little bit of discussion about some of the issues that it raises. Now, just before we sort of move on to the content of the podcast, I think for most of us here, we get 21st Century Saints, we get requests for interviews fairly frequently, and for the most part we have to say no. Do you want to talk a bit about why we decided to speak with Murray? Because I think it's pretty significant.
I think the decision to speak with Murray was because Murray was focusing his investigations around the problem specifically about reporting of abuse within the church. And he was looking much more around what is happening when the church are made aware of an abuse problem, aware of a situation where an individual may be in need of help and support, and they reach out as church leaders to find out what to do. So looking at the church's helpline, the advice that bishops and church leaders are given by lawyers about how to respond to abuse. And he was focusing very much around that and around individual stories that really demonstrated a pattern of behaviour. So it wasn't like one odd story, it demonstrated a pattern. And one of the things that's been really interesting was listening to Murray's broadcasting and Murray's investigation and his findings. Everything that he has identified is a direct parallel to that which we have identified in talking to victims, church leaders, lawyers, and in looking at abuse within the church as 21st century saints. We've seen a similar pattern of confusion about what to do when confronted with abuse, concerns about whether the advice being given to leaders is really victim and safeguarding focused or if it's a purely legalistic response, and looking at how people are protected within an institution that is very insular and an institution that closes ranks against outsiders. And we've seen that paralleled in our own findings.
So I think that ultimately the decision-making process about who we choose to engage with is probably quite simple. We need to know that someone, one, has a good reputation, that you demonstrate you've got a track record in being able to work specifically with victims and survivors, whatever demographic that looks like. We want to make sure that you've got some skin in the game, that you are invested in this, because what can happen is we are very reluctant to put victim survivors into the hands of anyone who could either get bored and drop them, or feel kind of intimidated and not take it any further, or just might behave in a way that is unethical. We found Murray's work to be unethical. Sorry,
and we don't want. Well, because we don't want to work with a journalist who's going to go for sensational reporting either. We're not interested in simply get the gory, horrible details of abuse out there to just get a few cheap reads on a newspaper or something. It's like, no, it's not about that. This is about serious credibility and respect, and reporting things as they are, and reporting in a way that is geared actually at raising awareness and leading towards change, not just to actually spotlight the system of failures, but actually this is the problem, this is what we can do about it.
So just to emphasize, just to make sure that because I was getting distracted there, we found that Murray's work was ethical, and that's why we were happy to have that conversation, because we felt that he would be responsible. Okay, is anybody, do you guys want to, maybe one of the other Britvengers, do you want to give us a kind of synopsis about, so episode 1 and 2 are released together. Who wants to kick us off with a bit of a synopsis about what your impressions of those first couple of episodes brought to the table?
I'll have a go if you like. So it kind of begins where Murray was initially investigating the finances of the church, and there's a whole lot for investigative journalists to sink their teeth into there. And there have been quite a few interesting situations and scandals in church finances in New Zealand. But while he was talking to people about that, he started to hear more about situations and concerns about cover-ups of abuse. So he kind of got diverted into investigating that a bit more thoroughly and going back to some of the people he talked to earlier just about finances, and they would just come out with case after case that they were aware of as you do talking to any experienced Latter-day Saint. They'll start to spill all these situations and incidents and how awful it was. And it seems that pretty much every stake or diocese in our church has got experience with this. But again, and a lot of sort of soul searching and agonizing about how they felt it wasn't handled well, either by the people, or I've spoken to several people who've been in leadership who, especially when back in the day when there was kind of zero useful training whatsoever, and they were all meant to be winging it based on promptings of the spirit. I think there are a lot of leaders in the church on a local level who carry a lot of guilt about how they mishandled or didn't know what to do with really tricky situations because they just didn't have the training. And that begins to be one of the themes that Murray teases out in the systems. And what I really find profoundly important and brilliant about his journalism is he is keeping it balanced. He talks to people on all sides of this. The church itself, of course, just fobbing him off with propaganda, but you know, he talks to bishops who've been trying to counsel people in situations of abuse and all the rest of it. And what he does brilliantly is really just gently but thoroughly and relentlessly, he navigates us through this interconnected web of people trying to do their best, conditioning to kind of veer away from telling legal authorities about abuse cases, and how ultimately a whole machine operates intentionally in the church's own systems to cover up abuse and to try and keep it out of the courts and out of the papers to reduce reputational harm. And always, almost every single time, the victims of the abuse are blamed, punished, ignored for the sake of prioritizing other things. And he just weaves through that, and each episode kind of takes a different perspective on that. And at first you're listening to people's stories and you think, why, how is this going to be relevant? Then it all, you know, you see how it pieces together. So I think just objectively as a piece of investigative journalism, it is top quality, astonishing, telling a complex story about a community that most people won't be familiar with, but you really feel you understand it because he gives people time to be themselves, to be, you know, not sensationalize, to offer the insight. I think it's a masterpiece. I really recommend it.
From the beginning, we see in the trailers for the podcast, you might hear a familiar voice. We hear our very own Sarah, who's got a little sound bite in the trailer. Do you want to remind me what you say in that little sound bite, Sarah? Because I think it's very cool.
Something along the lines of, "Oh, bishops phone the helpline and it all goes away."
I look forward to finding out how you dive into that, because we've been talking about this kind of thing for a really long time, and you spent a long time in this interview. So we're already teasing that you're going to hear some more of Sarah. But Nemo, Peter talks about interconnectedness, and there is a need, I think, for explanations about Mormonism. When, you know, so he kicks off by doing a bit of a pre-episode, a bit of an intro to Mormonism. We find in our safeguarding work, when we compile a report, we're having to do footnote after footnote to explain, here's what a bishop is, here's what it means, here's what a worthiness interview is. When it comes to the actual church structure and hierarchy, could you maybe speak a bit to that, because there are very clear church procedures about what should happen in abuse cases?
Yeah, I think he correctly identifies in one of the episodes that the bishop sits at the center of most of this stuff, right? They are the touch point for all of this. And I think one of the ways that organizations like the church survive and are able to get away with this sort of stuff, or this sort of stuff goes undetected, I should say, is because of their very complicated structures. To try and tell any sort of story about the church, like you said, it takes a lot of explaining. I was doing an interview with someone yesterday, and they said after everything I said, they then had 5 or 6 more follow-up questions. Okay, but hang on, what's that? What's this? What's that? And so that's some of the excellence of what Murray's done. In terms of the system that's at play here, the very clear expectation is that someone will confess abuse or someone will report abuse. It doesn't matter which way round that is. The bishop will then call a helpline that puts him on the phone to a church lawyer. That church lawyer does not represent the bishop, but represents the church. I think that's really important. If that lawyer at the other end of the phone became the bishop's legal counsel, that would be a great setup, because they would actually be in the position of having the bishop's legal interests at heart and making sure that he can do exactly what he needs to do within the bounds of the law. But they're not. Their client is the church. And so they will inform him of essentially what is in the church's best interests, and maybe his. They may be honest about that. They may present a situation, a dichotomy to the bishop that serves the purposes of the church, which, if you dig deeper into the law, as they did in Arizona, may not be as clear-cut as it was perhaps presented to the bishop, we could say. And then the bishop considers the matter closed, to use the church's favorite terms, depending on what the helplines told them to do. But it certainly doesn't go outside of the organization.
I think, and you mention, when it seems like all is done, the bishop will close a case, and certainly we can definitely speak to abuse cases when you're working with victims. It is so complex. Every story is very, very complex. But Ruth, this structure is really, really tight. People tend not to go rogue in this structure. They know to call the helpline. How much freedom do you think an individual would have to do their own thing?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, I've sat within that structure as a Relief Society president, as a primary president, and I remember having the training about what to do if we have any cause for concern, if anyone discloses anything to us. And the instruction was we were to inform the bishop, who would then call the helpline. And at that time, I was working in a primary school. My husband was a teacher as well. And both of our responses in that council meeting was, no, that won't be what we're doing, because we understand how it works in the UK. And actually, we could not only be held responsible for that, not disclosing that information to the right authority, we could lose our careers over it. So,
Ruth,
but with conditions,
it surprise you to know that in current, and this is very recent, church training videos, which are supposed to be designed to be watched by all ward and stake councils, that is still the advice.
Would it surprise me?
Would it surprise you?
No, because I'm cynical and old. No, not at all. And I think it's an absolute insult to call this a helpline. It helps nobody other than the corporate church. It is the lawyers of the church being able to get in front of a potential legal situation, a potential embarrassing situation to the corporation of the church. It's nothing to do with helping the bishops. It's nothing to do with helping the victims of abuse. It's nothing to do with preventing abuse from happening in the future. And sadly, we have seen time and time again that very inexperienced lay leaders, which we pride ourselves on, nobody gets paid. Well, we know they do, but nobody gets paid at those local levels. We pride ourselves on that, like that's some badge of honor. Well, nobody gets paid and nobody gets protected either. And they're asked to not only give of their time, but potentially make themselves very liable for decisions that they make as to what to do. So when a bishop makes that decision to go against that, to swim against that tide, and information is presented to them and they decide to do something else other than just report to the helpline, I'm imagining that's a really, really difficult position to find themselves in. And potentially that will then result in church discipline for not following the processes as prescribed to them. So in the UK, 21st century saints, what is now on paper, I'm not saying it happens in practice, but what is now what if bishops are told not to report, what should they then do?
Sarah?
Well, I think let's start with what President Nelson has said about abuse and work from there. President Nelson is the president prophet of the Corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that corporation bit is very relevant when we're talking about abuse. What he has said very clearly in different talks over the time, he said there is zero tolerance for abuse. He has said that people should be alert to the possibility of abuse and that people should act promptly if they become aware of abuse. But for to be a genuine zero tolerance and for to be genuine people being alert to abuse and people acting promptly, what we need to see is really strong, clear reporting to external authorities in every single case before the church even become involved in it. So what we need to see is the advice being given to people, to church members, to church leaders, to everybody. If you become aware of abuse, you call either police or children's services, depending on the situation. Immediate risk, call the police. If it's a child under 18, call children's services and make them fully aware of the concerns that you have. Listen to their advice, follow their guidance, and only after you have done that, phone the church helpline and let them know about the abuse. Because the only purpose for the abuse wanting to know quickly was so well put, Ruth, when you said that they want to get ahead of the game. They want to know of any potential liability. Because the first question the abuse line are going to ask is, did the abuse happen on church premises? Was it a church that perpetrated the abuse? Because they want to look at their level of liability. So you've got the strict letter of the law and you've got the moral compass that we want the church to be following. And the moral compass that we would expect the church to follow is that every single case of abuse is taken to external authorities and their advice and guidance is followed. That's the only way the church can truly say they have zero tolerance for abuse. If a leader is told, don't report the abuse. Now, I have to say, in the UK, I think most leaders are being told to report abuse. I think it falls down that it's not being checked up that they have reported abuse, and the quality of that reporting, it probably leaves a lot to be desired. But I think the message is being given to report. The difficulty you've got is...
Let me just qualify that, Sarah.
If they're saying, oh yeah, report the abuse.
Yeah, the message seems to be very clear. What we can evidence that we know about, the evidence is very clear that if a child is in danger, report the abuse. Other than that, it gets a little bit woolly. So if you continue what you're saying, and then we're going to go to Nemo.
It gets very woolly. Yeah. I think genuinely, when I've spoken to bishops and stake presidents and people, they've generally given me the message that they would always report abuse. I think the problem you get is sometimes, and we have come across many victims as we've been doing our work that have shared stories with us where bishops have been told, well, I can't make a statement to the police because the church lawyers told me not to. Or, well, I've been told not to get involved. I've been told not to make a statement. And we've heard this from several victims of abuse over the years that we've been involved in this work. So that doesn't show zero tolerance, because acting promptly and being alert to abuse is actually being willing to make a statement and say what you've seen, what you've heard, what you think the concerns are. So there's a lot. The other.
Sorry, before we come to Nemo, because we've got quite a few things to get through, I just want to highlight, and we will be coming back to talk about our report, but in our survey that we did last year, only something like 20% of people felt that their bishops knew what to do in the case of abuse. So I think it's one thing to be asked the question, or to make a statement that, yes, I would always report, because of course we would always report, but who are you reporting to? Is that the church helpline or is that authorities? Mm-hmm. Anyway, if we can come to Nemo first.
Yeah, I think in this situation, it's highly irresponsible to essentially give over your moral compass to lawyers. Like, I don't want to alienate the legal profession. I'm not too happy with lawyers at the moment in my own life, but one day I may need them. But then Jesus wasn't a fan of lawyers, so, I'm in good company there. But lawyers serve a client. They don't serve sort of objective morality, sort of in this setting. They serve the church's best legal interests. Those are not the same thing as the best interests of the victim, or even the best interests of the abuser. The person that needs help, that needs to be removed from that situation so that they don't hurt others and they don't continue to do things that are going to make their own life worse too. You know, it's the only people whose best interest is in the church. And I think it's irresponsible for an organization that claims some sort of moral arbitrage over society to, in these instances of abuse, hand over their moral compass and their morally dictated actions to legal professionals. They should be going to those legal professionals with a morally upheld action or a morally motivated action. We want to do this because this is what is right according to the morals of the church. How can we do that legally? Not what should we do legally, and then we'll try and moralize that. We'll try and make that the right thing to do post hoc.
Thank you. Absolutely. Peter?
Just a couple of thoughts. First of all, one of the major issues, and it's very clearly spelt out in the General Handbook, is where they strongly discourage bishops from or stake presence, whoever's been disclosed to, actually phoning the police themselves. One of the things that came out very strongly in the Arizona case was the church's lawyers were telling bishops for years to try and encourage, following their rules, to encourage the bishops who were aware that children were being abused in their ward to get the parents to phone the police, the abusers themselves or someone else, but that they shouldn't do it physically themselves because they had some cover of confidentiality between penitent and sort of clergy there in the legal system.
Sarah
can I ask you
contribute that a
to
little bit.
clarify on that, Sarah, where you say that you feel that in Britain, where in more extreme cases a child is obviously in danger, that the helpline lawyer is telling the bishops to report. Do you mean that the bishops themselves phone the police, or that they're leaning on the victims and their families or other people to actually be the people making the call?
They are asking that they are telling bishops that it needs to be reported, and they are asking them to ask the person who made them aware of the abuse to report. And if not, the bishop and if not, bishop should report it themselves. The difference, and where this is hugely problematic, is if they are told about abuse happening to another person. If somebody walks into the bishop's office and confesses to abuse, they are still claiming on to this absolutely deeply offensive to God principle of penitent privilege, whereby they claim that they're not going to report abuse if it's disclosed by an abuser, partly because the abuser has the right to disclose a confidentiality, and that they won't share things like this and get help if they know the bishop's going to report it. So they are not reporting self-confessions of abuse, which is hugely problematic and hugely dangerous. So what we need to get is bishops that are prepared to say, you have told me you've abused a child, I am going to phone the police and report this, and I'm going to do this today. And after they've done that, they can then phone. Because what the church helpline says is, tell the person to report that they've abused a child to the police, but tell them to seek legal counsel first. Well, the legal counsel that somebody's going to be given is, don't go and tell the police you've done this. So the church helpline are actually saying, go and report the police, but before you do that, speak to a lawyer so we can be certain that you're told not to go to the police. So they're simply not being honest about how this is working.
Ruth?
You muted me.
Yes, sorry, there's a little bit of feedback, Ruth.
I'm not really sure why. So yeah, sorry about that. So I find it, there's an irony here, because we all know of those situations. Think of the teenagers getting up to what teenagers get up to. It's around the whole world. The bishop tells his wife, the wife tells her friend. It's all passed around. In fact, the parents of the two teenagers get dragged in and they get told what the teenagers have admitted to. So there are some instances where this penitent privilege goes completely out the window. In fact, I would say in 90% of occasions, it goes completely out the window. And they're quite happy as bishops to tell all and sundry about what everyone else has been up to and admitted to in their bishop interviews. But funnily enough, when it comes to something where the church may have some legal responsibility, suddenly it's clammed up, shut up, don't talk about it, and the penitent is more important than the abused child. And I find that abhorrent. And I think Anyone who's been involved in that process needs to take a good hard look at themselves and question why they would put someone's penitence above a child. Because let's face it, if the worst that happens to them is that they have to face the legal consequences of their actions and they're never allowed to come to church again, that's part of their penitence. That's part of that process then. And it's better that than that a child can, and future children can also attend their church meetings. The church will function better as a safe place if the people that need help need to go through a process of retribution under the law, get the support and help that they require. Even if that means they can't attend church anymore. Why is their bum on a pew more important than a child's safety? I just don't understand that.
It's a mockery to talk about zero tolerance for abuse while you have people self-disclosing abuse, and that is not being taken to the police immediately as a matter of urgency. And in Arizona, the nonsense where they spoke about somebody telling the bishop that, well, you know, if you report this abuse, you could be sued. The church should have put their money where their mouth is, and they should have said, we have zero tolerance for abuse. You report this to the police, and if a child sex offender is stupid enough to sue you for breaching his confidentiality, and let's think about that realistically, then we as a church will pay for your legal defence, and we will pay any compensation that's awarded, and we will back you every inch of the way. But our priority is zero tolerance, so we will report the abuse, protect the children, we will enhance our reputation massively by doing so, and we will deal with the financial and legal flack of that. And that's called putting your money where your mouth is, but they're not very good at doing.
I am going to jump in at the moment, and I'm going to have to start using the mute button, and because, gang, we are going to have to keep this a little bit tighter. Now, if you want to know more about we're going to be covering penitent privilege a wee bit more. We're going to be doing a live episode tomorrow night following episode 6. So you have plenty of time to watch, to catch up, to listen and catch up. And then Sarah and I are going to come back on and do a little bit of a review about how she felt this episode went. Now, we also want to make sure we get to cover some things at the end of this episode that are so, so important. So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about the church's response. You see, after episodes 1 and 2, the church PR department offered, I don't even know if we could call it a response, because they didn't actually wait to watch the episodes. They didn't listen to them. They were really offended. And at the end of every episode, the New Zealand Herald is now sharing the church's response, and they've shared it on social media. I think this kind of speaks for itself. But I'd love to get you guys your thoughts, and if you want to share your thoughts in the chat about this response. I'm just going to read it out to you, but I'm not going to. There's some fluff I'm going to kind of just skip over, but we'll give you the highlights. This is the full written response from the Pacific Area Communications Director, Richard Hunter, to reporter Murray Jones. Dear Mr. Jones, as followers of Jesus Christ and members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day heavily on some individuals choose to abuse others across all parts of society. I just have to stop and point out that just because you're saying it's happening over there too doesn't mean that we have to not have a response to what's happening right here. Okay. Jesus was unequivocal when it came to abusers, and they quote some scripture there. When the Prince of Peace is speaking in such a firm way, as followers of the Saviour, we are compelled to do all we can to prevent abuse and to support victims. Our priority is the welfare of the victim and following the law of the land with respect to the abuser facing the consequences of their actions. Then he quotes Russell M. Nelson, who makes that wonderful statement about how upset he is whenever someone is abused and how really distressing it is for him. But to be fair, he does call out abuse in all its forms, which is significant. When a lay leader of one of our congregations learns of abuse, they are asked immediately to call a helpline to assist them to protect the victim, to protect the victim helpline, and to ensure that perpetrators face the consequences of their actions. Most of the reports of abuse that come to the attention of church leaders come from victims or their families and involve abuse away from church buildings and church activities. Relevance, Your Honour. Helpline staff offer advice that is focused firstly on protecting and caring for the victim. Working with local church leaders, the helpline ensures compliance with legal reporting obligations, encourages the victim or victim's family to report the abuse to civil authorities, and helps connect victims with professionals who can provide counselling assistance. It then goes on to talk about how the
not the bishop reporting, not the stake president reporting. Right. The victim and their family has to do the work. Yeah.
It points out that child protection training is needed by people who work with children to help them safeguard. I think we've mentioned before, we think that training is pretty crap. Church leaders regularly speak out about the evils of abuse. Not often enough, and talking is different from action. It mentions the online resources, and actually there are some online resources, to be completely fair, and the church does offer counselling when needed for members. I mean, that does happen, and that's to be applauded. In the coming months, the Church in New Zealand will study and implement relevant recommendations for churches from the Abuse and Care Royal Commission of Inquiry. I hope they do a better job there than the UK Church has done in implementing recommendations from the ICSA inquiry, which was the UK counterpart and happened a few years ago. Now, I just want to finish up this statement from the church by just its little kick in the shins as they're leaving. It seems, Mr. Jones, that you are focused on reporting on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Well, the church is fascinating. Of course he is. So what's the problem with that? We welcome honest and balanced inquiries. To assist you to more fully and accurately understand the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its members, so your reporting can be balanced, honest and respectful, we extend 5 invitations to you. Now, I'm just going to summarise these because they get lengthy. First, come and worship with us on a Sunday. Second, watch a session or sessions of conference. Third, study the church materials in the Abuse Life Help section on jesuschrist.org. Fourth, read the Book of Mormon along with the Bible. And fifth, next time you're traveling to the United States, come and see us at church headquarters. Right. Is it me, or are they trying to convert our buddy money?
He's trying to report on the church. He's not trying to join the thing.
Well, you never know.
And the church does like to hand its letters of complaint to reporters out in person, like they stormed into Broadcasting House to complain about John Sweeney's interview with Jeffrey R. Holland. So their invitation for him to come and see them in church headquarters could very well be so they can slap him with a letter in person. Because Kurt McConkie is just right across the road from Temple Square.
Right. Any other thoughts?
It might be similarly safe for a journalist to go into a Saudi embassy in Turkey. I wouldn't take that invitation. My gosh, you'll end up chopped up in the bath.
Are you offering me a free, a tour? I mean, obviously he has to pay for his own travel. They're not gonna treat him like a dignitary. But any other thoughts on the church's response?
Well, he should take them up on it actually and go and do a follow-up interview. Definitely. There's never accountability at the top.
Right, we're going to come to Ruth, then Sarah.
Sorry, keep muting me, Jane. I don't know why it keeps giving an echo. I would say he's obviously pressed a nerve because the fact that they're claiming his very kind observations of the church, he's looking at abuse. It happens to be happening within the Mormon church, but he's looking at institutions that are struggling to manage abuse happening within their ranks and why that might be happening. It happens to be happening within the Mormon church, and he's finding that fascinating. But his approach to Mormonism, his approach to understanding it and relaying that information, I think has been incredibly kind, incredibly sensitive, and he speaks to a lot of believing members as part of the interviews. And sadly, those believing members' experience has been that because they have been victims of abuse or because they've had to whistleblow about abuse, they then become the bad guys in the scenario, not the predator, not the abuser, but those that have been abused, because they won't just shut up about it. They won't just let somebody abuse them and go quietly and put up with it. And he's dealt with that really sensitively, and I think he's done a really fine job of not judging people for their beliefs, listening to them, taking it on board, and highlighting how that system of structure within the church is facilitating abusers rather than nipping it in the bud and actually dealing with it.
Sarah, we were talking just the other night that we've been on the receiving end of the church being a little bit huffy, and I would say that's a huffy response. Do you want to share your thoughts?
Isn't it just a huffy response? It's very much, look, abuse is happening everywhere. So why are you talking about abuse that happens here, rather than saying, we appreciate that churches are a breeding ground for abuse. We appreciate that culture and systems can perpetrate and maintain abuse. And we welcome advice and guidance from any experts in the field to help us make our church as safe as possible. The other thing is, he's inviting Murray to go to Salt Lake and have a discussion with them there. Well, actually, the church won't engage in discussions about abuse, because I'd extend an invitation to the social media listening team now to go back to the bosses that be within the church and ask them to come and join us on a debate about abuse. Anytime you want, come and join us to discuss abuse within the church on a podcast, and let's have an honest debate and an honest discussion. Yeah. So quite happy for the church to send whoever they want to come and have that discussion and debate, so we can give the church an opportunity to share their concerns, to share what they're doing, to show how much they've got a zero tolerance for abuse, and to say what they want to do about this. Come and join us. Come on a podcast and talk for yourselves. You get cross with us, church, when we speak and say that we shouldn't because people think we're speaking on behalf of the church. I don't know why anybody would think we do that. But come and join us and talk for yourselves about what you're doing to solve the problem of abuse.
Now, if the church or you guys in our listening audience would like an insight into what that conversation might look like, we are going to talk about a case next week in our live episode next Tuesday night. We have some really cool guest panelists coming to join us, and we're actually going to be talking about a scenario that, if you're familiar with British soap opera EastEnders, it covers the storyline of abuse. Now, you can be all snobby about if you watch soap opera or not, but this was a fantastically done and very, very insightful storyline. And we're going to talk about this in the same way that we would talk about a real live scenario. And we're going to be hearing from members of different faith communities about how these things would be handled. So we're hoping to share best practice and some professional thought, and we'd love for you to join us for that next Tuesday night. Now, episodes 3 and 4 of Heaven's Helpline are tough. They are really tough. And I'm just going to invite you to sort of share your thoughts, because my heart is full. Nemo.
I cried. There's no getting around it. I think the thing of all the stories in the church that I've heard about, of all the problems in the church, learning that 2 bishops knew about Paul Adams and what he was doing to his children, and that went on for 7 years, just gets me every time. And I think that story alone, I understand why Mike Resendez chose to cover it.
Yeah,
that's enough to get you. And then I think learning about the Daniel Taylor, is it Daniel Taylor incident in the episode after?
Yeah.
And hearing Doug, my namesake, talk out and call an actual helpline that actually connects to the police, and knowing that within months he was facing prison time for grooming children, and hearing the heartbreak of members who were otherwise devout members going, I can't believe I returned a child to this abuser's custody because I thought the church was handling it, or I thought the church would deal with this or that. It's seeing time and time again the trust that people place in this institution being betrayed by its own self-interest, because the church is only concerned with its own legal liability, and as long as that's covered, they can say all they want that they don't tolerate abuse, but the systems that they have in place currently allow abuse to happen far too readily. So if they really don't tolerate it, they'll tighten up the systems. That would be my.
Before I come to you, Peter, I just I want to. I'll make my confession here. Sarah and I have, and with other people we've worked with, our focus has been on the church's response to the abuse in the UK, because this is what we can have an impact on, and hopefully there will be a global impact, and we know that that's the case. We also know in a global church we have to have an awareness of what's happening. But I'll be honest, any time, and you did this very often, the significance of the Arizona case was one that you would refer to a lot. And I used to feel like, right, that's really important, but we need to focus on what's happening in the UK. Can you speak a little bit to how this was highlighted? Because I think even as members who were watching the case and were listening to what had happened, this podcast sort of blew it open. There was information that we weren't necessarily aware of. Oh, that's how that worked. That's how this happened. So could you maybe give us a little bit about why the Arizona case is so relevant and how it's covered in the podcast?
Yeah. So that abuser being found out actually began in New Zealand, interestingly, and it provides a perfect segue for Murray to kind of to go into the Arizona case. For those who don't know, the Associated Press Spotlight investigative journalists were the team that were in the movie who took down the Boston Diocese of the Roman Catholic Church over its cover-ups of abuse. So quite naturally, they have discovered similar levels of institutional cover-up occurring in the LDS Church, and have done some incredible and hopefully groundbreaking journalism around that. Though tragically, as this series describes, the church in effect won, because they fought hard in the Arizona courts to protect this idea that they didn't have to report abuse being disclosed to a clergyman, to their own staff. Therefore, it's all okay, and they sort of almost celebrated winning that in the church newspapers.
Well, they said they are pleased with the opinion of the court.
With the outcome.
Yeah.
Let me be more. Let me ask more specifically.
So what happened was, I mean, what was amazing, and this is something we should all be inspired by, is the reason that man in Arizona actually ended up, in a sense, facing justice and his children were saved, is that the police systems investigating abuse cases in New Zealand were thorough and forensic, going through the collections of footage and materials that one of the people they arrested had in his house, and within it was the abuse of his daughters that the man in Arizona was posting online and sharing. And they kind of persisted with working hard to track down who that person was and to make those connections. And eventually it was because of the persistence of a local law enforcement officer in New Zealand that connection was eventually made to Arizona, and that the whole thing was then made public, even though it turned out the church at the most senior level of its lawyers and general authorities were aware that this had been going on for years, and were persistently telling the bishops not to report the abuse and stop it happening. So that was the connection with New Zealand. But I think just to sort of something you said about how it's about protecting the church's own self-interest. As I keep saying these days in my podcasts and in our conversations, it's totally self-defeating. Their karma is ruthless. They think that by withholding information from members, they're protecting them and keeping their church growing. They're not. They're finding out stuff online and leaving in droves. And the absolute worst thing a church could do is look like it's weak on child abuse cover-up. And it's incredible coincidence that literally today, the Archbishop of Canterbury, of the entire International Anglican Church of England community, is resigning because of his role and his church's institutional role in a completely failed response to brutal abuse. and covering that up, and again prioritizing the interests of their own clergy over their victims.
Brilliant.
And a friend of mine just messaged me saying our leaders should be ashamed, you know, as in, we got the same stuff going on in our church, why aren't they resigning? They
Right.
never bloody resign. They don't take responsibility. You know, we've seen profound acts of penitence by the Catholic popes in various situations that have actually helped to be a lot to heal. You know, obviously they've still got a huge responsibility there, but that's the way you do it. You apologize, you resign, you accept responsibility. And when you just compare that level of maturity with that stupid statement and emails and the press releases the church gives in response to horrific revelations about their own complicity in abuse, just trying to, I mean, I'm a school teacher of teenage boys. Oh, but look at that kid over there. This is always the response if they're in trouble. Never take responsibility. It's his fault. Why are you having go at me? What about them over there? I mean, it's literally childish. And their public statements about abuse have always been immature and childish until very recently. Fantastical nonsense, you know, complete denial.
So we need to.
So I think just and that state of paranoia as well in the church, just to finish up, the idea of what Murray really gets through in talking to these people, and is you're so locked into this them versus us idea that we're fighting the world, that the world doesn't understand Mormons, they're looking for any reason to take our religion down, and if that happens, people don't get saved and don't go to heaven. Becomes, and we've all lived with that as TBMs, it becomes your overriding moral ethic, and it's ingrained in you from birth. I mean, I'm really only now starting to disentangle how intensely brainwashed we are in that mindset of them and us, of defensiveness, of turning on anyone who feels like a traitor from within, of trusting the church's authorities as entirely virtuous and wholly purely motivated, and the relentless messaging you get in the church to distrust secular systems of anything, of science, of the law, of psychotherapy. Any of these things are all of academia now, are constantly disparaged in a church setting. And it means that you don't trust those people. And it's so simple. Just the incredible, you were talking about how each of these cases are really complex. They're not. It's super simple. This world is full of charities, of professionals, of government and law enforcement organizations who are experts in judging risk with abuse. Just hand it over to them. We don't need to worry about it. And they're not there like a baying mob. Oh, we got a Mormon, let's put it all over the front page of the newspapers. They're overworked and overwhelmed as well. They're not going to rush into a situation unless it's really quite serious. They're not going to overreact,
So
because
I'm
you're
going
just
to
one
have
of a lot of
to
people
move us
phoning.
on a bit because we
Yeah,
need to
go on.
finish up quite soon. But what actually I can say is that when Sarah and I report to external organisations when the church do something really, really well, they are congratulatory. No one's saying, you know, why weren't you doing this all along? So we need to move towards wrapping up. But before we do, it's really significant that I think we need to mention the process by which these abuse cases, particularly when it's online abuse, the way these cases get joined up worldwide. There are global organizations that their role is to do that. It used to be CEOPS in the United Kingdom. It's now, I believe, Sarah, Operation Hydrant. Is that right? Could you share a little bit about what Hydrant is?
Well, CEOP and Hydrant have got slightly different roles in that CEOP is still kind of very much around child exploitation online and protection and looking at around that. The role of Hydrant in the UK, Operation Hydrant, are a national police tasking force that actually will direct and inform and guide police investigations where there's institutional abuse. So if, for example, you had several cases of abuse happening within a children's home or within a church setting or within a school setting, or like the Westminster Jimmy Savile, things like that, Operation Hydrant would pick up those high-end cases where it was likely that there would be multiple victims of a particular institutional person, and they would they would be helping. They wouldn't investigate it, but they actually guide and inform and help the local police force to understand what links they need to be making, what they need to be looking at, and how they need to be managing the entire investigation to pull it together. Operation Hydrant are they're very good team.
Absolutely. Ruth.
Yeah.
Oh, Ruth is going to unmute herself because I'm not sure I knew. There we go.
I'm just curious, ladies of 21st Century Saints, have you had to, in your capacity and your role in your advocacy and work, have you liaised with Hydrant at all? Okay, that's my answer.
Anyway, yeah, we work with lots of
we communicate with many organisations, and we've passed information on to many organisations where we believe there are links and where that organisation are best placed to handle different information, data, and to make links and to make things safe. So
absolutely,
we do a lot of stuff behind the scenes that nobody sees.
Yeah. So we want to just now quickly tell you that episode 5 takes a bit of a different change of pace, and it's really worth listening to. But we start to build from episode 5 into what's going to be talked about in episode 6, and that is focusing on those people who are fighting back. Sarah, this is where I want to come to you and talk to you about your experience of recording. I want to ask, how are you fighting back? What you want the church to do, and I know this is just sort of throwing a stack of questions at you, but ultimately, as Peter points out, that people who talk about this are often seen as the threat to the church, and Murray's podcast Heaven's Helpline points that out. So I want to ask you, are you damaging the reputation of the church by having this conversation? And just share your thoughts about what you're hoping for from episode 6.
Jane, I do not believe I am damaging the reputation of this church around abuse at all. The church are damaging their own reputation in how they respond and manage abuse. I have no role in this church's reputation. I actually have little interest in the church's reputation. I have little concern about defending the church's reputation. I absolutely do not believe that I, as a single person in this corner of the universe, are capable of ruining the church's reputation. The church do that all by itself without my help. I think where my role is very much is around wanting to bring to the attention of church leadership very simple changes and improvements that can be made in training, in policies and procedures, in addressing the culture that perpetrates, maintains, aids and abets abuse, to enable members to be better educated, better informed, leaders better trained, better qualified, better able to understand their responsibilities and how to respond to difficult situations, so that we actually have a safer church. Church and faith communities can be incredible places for children to grow. They can be wonderful places of nurture, of love, of faith, of testimony, of learning service, learning responsibility. They can be great, but not if they're unsafe and dangerous. So my role in fighting back is to say to the church, it doesn't have to be like this. Lose your paranoia, lose your fear that you think everybody's out to get you, because you've got a big problem of institutional trauma in this church and not everybody's out to get you. So try and lose that. Reach out to external agencies, some of the really good children's charities we've got in the UK, some of the specific charities that work with churches around child protection, safeguarding experts and specialists. Reach out to them. Get help to write policies that are going to be robust and effective and easily interpreted and understood by members. Get some good quality training in place so people can have an opportunity to discuss, to talk, to understand, and just build a pattern where there's an absolute consistent message of, no matter what the circumstances, we report to external authorities first and then the helpline. The sheer fact that the helpline's answered by a lawyer tells you you're going to get a legal response. And legal responses are only one part of safeguarding, and a legal response is a necessary part of safeguarding, but it's not sufficient for safeguarding, and it's not sufficient for protecting, responding to victims or managing risk. So a legal response is one small part of safeguarding, safeguarding, and the church need to be open to having experts in safeguarding involved in their safeguarding work, like the Church of England have done, like the Roman Catholic Church have done, which is why they're streets ahead.
So if we can take another maybe 3-4 minutes of your time. First of all, I promise you that I'm going to get Sarah nice and ragey in advance of tomorrow night's episode so that she can just let you all have it about what she thinks after Heaven's Helpline. So we hope you'll join us for that, because Sarah, when she's caffeinated, angry Sarah, is something to behold, and it's brilliant. We've also not specifically mentioned, and I don't want to leave this episode tonight without doing it, Andrew Ford is the person who runs the church helpline in the United Kingdom. Not Captain McConkie, it's one man. And church safeguarding, the church safeguarding helpline, and most certainly the church safeguarding process, is heavily reliant on that one individual. There is a problem.
Hang on, and his son, Jane. It's not just him anymore, because his son's
Sarah,
involved in
we can talk about that tomorrow. So it's heavily weighted that if you call the church helpline, you're going to get through to Andrew Ford in the United Kingdom, and he is responsible for answering those calls. Safeguarding unnecessarily puts a lot of responsibility on his shoulders. Okay, we want to quickly tell you before I go round and just ask for a few closing thoughts. This is really important. Audience, we really need your help with this. We are going to be, do you remember that time we contacted all of the bishops in the United Kingdom to let them know what their safeguarding responsibilities were? Well, we need to contact people again, but this time we need to contact bishops and stake presidents. But more importantly, we need you to contact your local politicians. We can't do that part for you, but we can certainly facilitate it. Now, I hope to be able to quickly share what this is going to look like. We have come up with, glasses are going to go on. We have come up with an information pack, which is currently being printed into a little A4 document. And it looks like this. It's a Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a guide, and it tells you all you need to know about what the church is doing about safeguarding. Those things do come up. What the church is doing about safeguarding, what they need to know, and things like that. And we want to make sure that we can send that to people who need a copy of it. Now, printing costs obviously are more expensive than the last time when all we needed was stamps. So we're hoping that you will make a contribution, but more specifically than that, when you make a contribution, can you tell us who you want us to send this to? So if it's your bishop, let us know. If it's your stake president, let us know. We will be delighted to get that in the post to them. And more importantly, if you can send it to your local politician who is in a position to be able to get that information to the people who make decisions, that is the very best thing you can do. Now, if there's anyone else that you feel that it would be beneficial for them to be able to see or share, then that would be great. And I've just realized I'm not convinced that I actually managed to share that screen, but you get the gist. It's a gorgeous glossy book and you will all think it's very pretty. We can send this to you digitally, and it's really important that we let you know that we can do that. This is going to be launched next week on our show. The thing is, we want to kind of use your training of, do you remember whenever you used to be asked to police Book of Mormons? Do you remember why physically handing a Book of Mormon was really important? We're going to apply that to this. People who have that physical copy are much likely to consider it and give it a little bit of thought. They're going to be told not to read it. We want them to read it. And if you tell them why it's important to them to read it, then they're more likely to listen. So yeah, use your Mormon training for good. And don't forget, we're going to be with you tomorrow night. Now, to wrap up, closing thoughts, Ruth, so we can let you go and get on with the rest of your night. Do you want to share some thoughts?
Firstly, ladies, you are absolutely amazing and your work has been incredible. And I'm so glad, Sarah, that Murray got in touch and has picked your brain, because it sends a message that the work you're doing in the UK is so important, so vital, and so it's caused change, and that's rippled around the world. It's been talked about around the world, especially within the Mormon community. So well done, you two. Heaven's Helpline is one of those programs that I think is going to create change, and Murray Jones should be absolutely congratulated. Panorama, the BBC should be picking it up and building a programme off the back of it, because it doesn't just speak to Mormonism, it speaks to all insular institutions that are struggling to allow themselves to be vulnerable and say, we might have a problem here, and what can we do to fix it, and accept help from outside of themselves. And I think he has done it in such a good way. So yeah, congratulations to Murray Jones, and I will be listening tomorrow once it goes live. So well done.
Excellent.
Nemo, do you want to share your closing thoughts?
Sure. I think it's telling that the church preemptively condemned the podcast the moment they found out what the topic was about, because I think that's telling that they know they have a problem in this arena, and they know how this is going to look. So they can already say that it's going to be a podcast that looks negatively towards the church, because they know themselves they have an issue here, and it's just whether they choose to fix it or not. So let's hope they do.
You had a chat with Murray yourself. He's a good guy, right? You liked him?
Yeah, I was on the call with Sarah, but to be honest, Sarah was saying stuff that was much more relevant than I was, to be honest. So,
I mean, I wish I could congratulate Murray for seeing it blindingly obvious that, you know, we can also, but Sarah is that good. She is professional and she knows what she's talking about. I've learned more in my entire life, you know, like working with Sarah, I've learned more with her than I have in my entire life. It's been quite the ride. Peter, who can I just say before I come to you for closing thoughts, Peter, Peter and the rest of the gang, but particularly Peter spent a long time with us going through and helping us in the writing of our booklet. So you're going to get some classic Peter Bleakley moments in there too.
It was a pamphlet before, and now it is a full booklet.
And now it's it's like the golden plates and Justice League. Peter, you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, just in a way, I don't think you've yet kind of clarified what's in this booklet, so I'd just like to sell it a bit. So what it has is something you could give to anyone who'd just like to understand more about the context of abuse and safeguarding within the LDS Church. It explains a bit about our culture, about the jargon of who does what, but particularly in a way, its main point is positive recommendations. So there's kind of a table at the end where it lists so about 10 or so categories of things where the church has made significant progress in recent years and improvements regarding abuse, particularly in our situation here in the UK, where a combination of very concerned local LDS leaders and us as podcasters and other people collaborated in advocating for reforms, that several of which have been implemented. But then it has next steps. So with each positive step that's happened, from particularly Sarah's professional experience of a lifetime in lots of different roles in safeguarding professionally with local governments and other voluntary organizations, it's outlining what still needs to be done, because there's always a tendency in the church to think, you know, rest on their laurels. The job's done. We've done a little bit. That's fine. We're fixed now, which is why it gets in so many of the scrapes it does, because there's never an ongoing sense of this is an open door and we've still got a journey to go on. It's a process. So there's some fantastic, really positive, practical, completely doable, but we're going to have to fight for every one of them, recommendations of what is still in that gap between where even in the UK the church is at with safe and what an actual professional operation of safeguarding looks like, which is already being modelled by other voluntary organisations, by most of the mainstream churches in the country, and charities. So it's just very much itemizing what's still missing from our system. And it's super important for Latter-day Saints to realize we are nowhere close to that yet. And as those of us who, like me as a teacher in our professional careers, get staggeringly better training just in a 2-hour session once a year than is offered in the totality of the training at the moment for in the LDS context.
So Peter, because
there's a long way to go.
You haven't, you know, the printer's version of this, the printer's manuscript. Because of the page numbers, you're the graphic design guy who gets all of this. Because there was an uneven number of page numbers, we now have a blank page in the front to write your testimony in it. So whenever you give it, you can share your thoughts And that's in honour of you, but also in honour of
genius.
for needed us too. Okay, before we go, just the final reminder, because I'm going to come to Sarah to take us out. Before we go, I need you all to go and listen to Heaven's Helpline. I don't know, message John Delenn and make sure he's listening to it. Who else? RFL and Bill Real. Nemo's already been listening to it. The Mormon world is kind of
Tell your bishop to listen. Tell your bishop to listen to it.
It is so important. Politicians have been being told about this. This is so important. So make sure that we're not sitting in this. Get nominating it for Brodie Awards, because that's coming up soon. And there's been some pretty good content from these guys here that would be good to see you get a mention. So to take us out, we are going to see you tomorrow night after the latest episode drops. We will catch you then. Sarah, do you want to take us out with some closing thoughts?
First of all, I'd like to make you all aware that next Sunday, on the 17th of November, is Safeguarding Sunday. Now, there's a charity called 318, which is a child protection charity that focuses on making church and faith communities safer. And every year, the third Sunday in November, they hold a Safeguarding Sunday when they request every single church or person attending a faith community to have a conversation with somebody about safeguarding and abuse, to just get it on somebody's radar. They've got a website called 318. There's loads of materials and resources on there that you can have a look at, including a fantastic hymn that is superb, which is really kind of like sort of drums and guitar and quite jazzy, but it's really good hymn. So Safeguarding Sunday, 3,000 churches in the UK are signed up to Safeguarding Sunday. So far, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints isn't signed up to it, but that is a problem. I am giving a stake-seeking assignment, so it might happen to get mentioned on that day, because I am doing a stake talk that day, so it just might happen to get mentioned.
Not anymore, you're not.
Nemo.
We've just had
Nemo, what a
cynical.
I'm just about to get a cancellation. The exec tech's going to be sending me a message any minute now to cancel my plans for next Sunday.
No, not just cancelling the talk, cancelling you in general. The church is just, I'm sorry. But...
I love you.
You're going to get one of these in the post soon.
Can I have a party?
He's doing so, isn't he?
The other thing I want to mention about the other reason why we want to get this booklet and this information out to church leaders and get it out to MPs, where we mentioned about your members of parliament, your local politicians. The reason we want this document to go to them is because of the recommendations that we're making, because currently in the UK, faith communities are exempt from any governmental oversight as to how they implement safeguarding procedures. So it's the Wild West out there. If they choose to do nothing, they get away with it. It's time to get some government regulation and oversight into what churches are doing, because we've proved they cannot be trusted to do it with good grace, good quality on their own volition. So we need to get members of parliament talking about this and saying, is it time that we reviewed whether we should bring churches into the scope of regulation around some of these issues, and at least have the debate and get the debate started? When we've spoken to MPs, they've been extremely receptive. I spoke to my MP when we first started safeguarding, and she wrote to the church that got really quite huffy with me about it. I don't know what their problem was. And they were actually quite rude to the MP, I thought, but anyway, that's their problem. And the MP also wrote to the Minister for Safeguarding, who wrote back to me and said, thank you for bringing this about the church to our attention, and etc., etc. And she told me what was going on and various things. So we really want to get the conversation started amongst political decision makers. So make an appointment, talk to your MP, use your missionary training skills. Every member a missionary, every member a safeguarding worker. Okay,
right.
Use those skills and get this booklet placed.
So we're going to talk more about the booklet in a few weeks. We haven't even launched it yet, and we want the focus of tonight to be the Heaven's Helpline podcast. Please go listen. Please go share it. It is so important. And thank you all for being with us tonight. We really appreciate you all.
Thank you.